also everywhere else in the world, or in many places at least. I think we have some people from Dubai, from Paris, obviously, I've heard, from New York, and probably from Montreal, and a lot of other places. So it is an honor for Numbly to actually welcome you, John. You invited me a couple of days ago during your visit at the London Business School, and that was a great day, I think, for you, not because of my being there, but because as a South African, you won the Rugby World Cup that day. So, sorry for the British people in this room, but it's good to remind you of this great event. You are an authority in the field of marketing, especially big data and digital marketing. It is for us as practitioners an honor to have you here. You decided to come speak to us a little bit about what the internet did to marketing, and we had some ideas about that, but we are so interested in getting your opinion with probably way more thoughtful ideas and challenges about that. So once again, in the name of all the Numbly people, welcome, John, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And I want to say that very nice of you to welcome me here, but it was wonderful how my students welcomed Timo when he came to ODS. They can't help but think that they would rather have had a course taught by him than me. Well, I didn't ask them their opinion on that question because I was afraid of the answer. But this question of you're the practitioners and I'm the academic, and who has the authority and who has who learns from whom? It's very clear to me that we learn from you. This is the last 20 years, which is more than 1 hour review in this parts of this talk, have been academia scholarship playing catch up to practice. Practice has just raced ahead. I have a case on the Dove Real Beauty campaign, some of you may know this campaign. And this case takes a 60, 70-year view of the Dove brand, from its birth in the 1950s to recent developments here. Be closer. Okay. And what's amazing in that case is that from the 1950s until the early part of this century, nothing happened. Advertising went from black and white to color, but there was no real change in the strategy of the brand or any of the practices that we would determine with success. Suddenly, so there was a common strategy that you could reverse engineer, and it really was the same strategy for 60 years. Then comes something like 2004, and every 2 years after that, the copy strategy changes radically. It's the Real Beauty campaign on top of the old sort of 1/4 cleansing cream campaign. And then it's, well, Real Beauty doesn't work because people are making fun of our contention that beauty is not an external thing. So we shift the campaign to self-esteem, and we make it the self-esteem of young girls because they're less vulnerable to satire. And so continuously the campaign is ducking and diving and weaving and changing to respond to the fact that it's now an interactive environment where people can talk back to the brand and tell them brand what they think of it. That's what the world you live in, and that's the world that we academics are playing catch up to. So we have to no longer have our lectures that we've prepared and put in a file cabinet. Now we are going out every day. So this little thing here, my HBS marketing tag, is literally what we use now instead of a textbook. So we're saying to the students, if you want to see what we think is interesting in practice, it's that. It's what we are retweeting on behalf of other people.
Okay, so you all know this, do you? No, is this ancient history too that some people have never even met? And I start with Disaster Girl partly because it's a disaster that we're talking about. She has been used in a variety of ways to describe situations that are out of control, and so Leora made this. Leora, by the way, let me introduce you, works with me and provides my access to the real world, and she made that in about a minute, right? My humor, her talent. So if you like the lettering, that's her. Anyway, this is what's going on, and here's where, in a sense, the most important part of the present started, with this paper by these two young men, very young at the time, barely, I think, 21, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, who had founded at this point a company called Google, and then were told by Stanford that because Google was based on intellectual property developed while they were at Stanford, they had to publish everything they were doing. And so they wrote this paper called The Anatomy of a Large-Scale Hypertextual Web Search Engine. And what I find just unbelievable about this is this little section here that was actually in an appendix to the paper, I pulled it out, in which they say, currently the predominant business model for commercial search engines is advertising. And that's a bad idea, they say. You can't run a search engine with advertising. These are the people who went on to become the richest people in the world on advertising. But they say, you can't do that because in our search engine, one of the top results is the effect of cellular phone use upon driver attention. And it explains how you have accidents if you use cell phones in cars. Well, no commercial search engine running on advertising is going to find that as the search result because it's going to interfere with the sale of phones. So, it's clear that a search engine which was taking money would have difficulty justifying that page to its paying advertisers. And he says, advertising-funded search engines will be inherently biased toward the advertiser and away from the needs of consumers. Of course, after a while, they get over that, and the result is President Trump. So, 10 years ago, these were the top 10 brands in the world. Today, these are the top 10. The difference between them and these is none of these is a product, except possibly Apple, but I think even Apple is not what you'd call a product. It's a platform. And the reason it's successful, as I'm going to spend some time saying, is because it's a platform. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Facebook are obviously platforms. At best, you could call them customer services, but really, they are places where two sides come together to meet. By the way, I encourage questions, comments, disagreements more than anything else, because a lot of the things I say are wrong, and the only way to reveal their error is for you to challenge them. So please don't think that I'm arrogant or defensive. On the contrary, I think if you disagree, we can get truth out of this meeting. So I had some data from 2002, so I collected the data for today, or for last year, and here's what it says. It says really nothing much has happened to television advertising. It's about the same number as it was back in 2002. Total advertising has grown sort of what you'd expect, a bit of inflation. So therefore, in a sense, TV has shrunk. But of course, what's striking about that chart is this, that these two new media, or I should say, this is one medium really. Display is 20 media. It's such a different thing to search that it's misleading to present them as two things, but they both doubled, and they have driven total digital to exceed total analog. And they've had a devastating effect on newspapers, total spending, not much of an effect on radio, a lot of effect on direct mail, because paid search just does mail so much better. So that's one way to think about why senior people in this field are out of touch. And that's probably, you know, the most important reason to take a 15, 20-year view of things, is it's only by thinking about what it was like to grow up in that 2002 era and be successful and then rise to the positions where you're passing judgment on other people's plans. It's only if you appreciate that you can see how wrong much senior leadership in brand-driven products can be. They're just, I mean, we're talking now a lot about reverse internships, where the interns lead the leaders because of that kind of rapid transition. I think it's obviously the case that marketing is a craft. It's not a science. It's not a discipline. It's just a craft. It's just like making pots with clay. And when you change the way you make pots, you change the pots. You change what we judge to be a good pot and what's in a useful pot. And that's the argument here, that because the tools have changed so radically, everything changes. So, you know, it used to be that you built the toy market around, at least in the United States, around Saturday morning cartoons, which all children watched as a rite of passage. There was no point in going to school on Monday if you hadn't seen the cartoons. But then the products promoted on the cartoons, in fact, the very subject of the cartoons, was available in a retail store called Toys R Us. So both of those have gone. Nobody watches television anymore, and nobody goes to, because Toys R Us is out of business. Instead, something like this. Ryan, age 7, was at one point the highest paid performer on YouTube. Ryan got to that status before he could, before he could speak. Just the sight of Ryan playing with children's toys drove the demand for children's toys. And where did you buy them? You bought them, of course, on Amazon. So this is one of the summary headlines for why things are so darn different now. You used to just be able to take money and throw it at the market. And if you spent enough money, your toy would dominate Toys R Us, or your detergent would dominate the shelves of supermarkets, and so on. And brands were big because they had to be. Because if they weren't big brands, they couldn't afford the budgets to make them big. And so brands got bigger and bigger, and marketers got more and more powerful. Today, it's kind of the opposite. Money can't buy attention. So brands don't have to be big. And once they don't have to be big, they quite enjoy being small, because they can have more intimate relationships with customers, they can work directly with customers, and customers like the sense that they use brands that nobody else is using. We've always wanted that. We didn't like to eat at McDonald's. It was just that there were more McDonald's in the world. Now we've got a much more heterogeneous, a much more segmented structure of the fast food market. So we've got perhaps the most interesting development in marketing, I think. You may disagree on this one, but I think direct-to-consumer brands are the thing that, it's our legacy. It's the legacy of these 5 years to future generations. It's the source of the destruction of companies like Unilever and Procter & Gamble. It's why companies like Unilever and Procter & Gamble are desperately trying to acquire direct-to-consumer brands, which is kind of missing the point, right? Because nobody wants to buy a direct-to-consumer brand sold by a big box manufacturer. So we've seen it in the competition for Gillette razors. We've seen it in the Casper mattress success, cosmetics that are tailored to individual consumers who like those cosmetics and not the generic L'Oreals and so on. Those are where the action is in marketing today. You want to shoot me down at this point? This is a good time to come in and say, no, come on, that's a gross generalization. You agree. So really, you wouldn't buy L'Oreal stock?
No, you would buy L'Oreal. As an investor, yes, because there's a mass market that will still be there, and not everybody's reachable, especially in developing countries. So direct-to-consumer brand is very much developed country. In developed countries, you have still your catalog or your door-to-door sales because it's not big enough. There's no scale. The knowledge of internet, the digitalization is not there. So big.
Okay, good. Any other comments? comments or agreements or disagreements? What would you do if you were L'Oreal in this environment? You'd retreat to the third world.
No, I guess. So I would have almost parallel business models. You have a growth business model using your established brands in emerging markets, and then you would probably invest, but not necessarily outright own or integrate, smaller direct-to-consumer brands. That's what I would do.
Great. Any other comments? Anyone seen L'Oreal doing it? So I tried to write a case on L'Oreal. We got quite far with it, actually. It just was too big a problem to compress into our usual formula for cases, which is about 10 pages. And the thing that most impressed me was that L'Oreal would run a kind of an investor conference for startups. Would run it in various parts of the world. I went to the one in Boston. And what happens is you get a group of L'Oreal executives, and you get probably 30, 40 startups coming into the room, pitching what they have to sell to a brand, to one of the brands of L'Oreal. And the promise is, if we like what you're talking about, we'll let you work for us. So we're not going to invest in you. Well, there was a couple of cases where they did, but we will become your client. And they were getting really, really good ideas out of this process. And you can imagine, to a startup, the chance to have to take one of the L'Oreal brands and put it on your portfolio, really, really great. Okay, so you all know who this is? Well, you've got like 2 weeks, and you will have to know who this is, okay, because I think this is the future of Britain. This is Holly H., who is the most successful TikTok personality at the moment. She acts, she sings, she dances with no discernible talent, but endless enthusiasm, and she does it on TikTok and on YouTube. She has 13 million fans on TikTok, which makes her the leading TikTok character in the UK. And her YouTube performance is not that great, really, 4 million, but nevertheless, she's worth $2 million. Nevertheless, again, she lives with her parents, or perhaps her parents live with her. I'm not sure who's making the money here. But how does a person make money on a thing like TikTok? Well, there's third-party ads. In other words, you just sit there, and while TikTok itself doesn't sell advertising yet, it's about to, but it's not. Others want to ride your coattails, get into your slipstream, and place ads against your popularity. She does occasional product placements. She was commissioned I think it was DreamWorks, to make a trailer for How to Train Your Dragon, and then occasionally she will sell merchandise. The Times of London, that well-known edgy publication that always lives on the cutting edge of culture, places her as Britain's most influential 23-year-old. At the same time, just as the internet has enabled someone like Holly to come out of nowhere and become quite rich, so the internet has enabled the well-known branded Macedonian teens. I don't know if you know the Macedonian teens? You would if you lived in the United States, because you would blame your president on these people. Because they discovered that they could run ads for Trump on right-wing publications, or rather, not ads. They could run content. And the content would attract eyes, and the eyes would attract ads, and they would get paid by YouTube for the ads that they created. And as they said to reporters, we didn't care how the election came out. We were just trying to make pocket money. We wanted to buy a car, we wanted to buy watches, we wanted better cell phones, we wanted more drinks in the bar, and as a consequence, we destroyed democracy in the Western world. That's what the internet has wrought. I think that this is kind of obvious, that once upon a time, you put a lot of money into doing marketing right, and ads were highly polished, very veneered. And let's see if this runs. Now well, actually, this is the before. So this is, you don't have to hear the words, it's not important, but think of the semiotics of this picture. This is a polished actor living in the White House, surrounded by, dressed very well, wearing a brooch. All that stuff is exactly what someone in the 1990s would have done. This is the way Senator Clinton's competitor announced the launch in the same week. Notice the different semiotics. Now he's wearing a tie, I'll grant that, but he's not in the White House, he's in a media room, and he's leaning forward, he's not sitting back, he's not decorated in any way. So what I'm trying to suggest there is that spontaneity beat a good copy strategy. What Senator Clinton did was work with the assets she had, just as any traditional brand manager would have recommended. Take the things you've got and maximize them. On the other hand, this person who was barely on the political scene had nothing to work with, so he could be authentic, he could be spontaneous. And that trend continued. So now we have this. And as a result of that, we now have, I like to think we have this. This is what I would call an ad. So, what do you do about a thing like that? That's an ad. It's seen by millions and millions of people, and they pass it to their friends, and everyone's getting a laugh out of it, except the folks at FedEx. And they have to respond, and that's when you get a chance to do what happens in the Dove commercial, which is, the market speaks, the company has to speak in reply. And they do a good job. We could go into that in detail. But that notion that marketing is about cleaning up the mess after it's happened, as opposed to creating the perfect polished presentation, is what I want to get at. Now, I'm going to change gears quite a lot. I'm wondering what the time is. I did have a while. Great. So if you know the numbers on a clock, that would work perfectly. Yeah, I guess I've been going for about half an hour, right? Okay. So yeah, that's probably a good place to switch gears, because I want to move from the level of the brand or the product or the influencer to this more abstract level of the firm or the corporation. And you remember Nokia. Nokia, in 2007, half the world's smartphones. More cameras than any other camera manufacturer in the world because of the phone. And now you take that concept of brand equity that is so central to a lot of people's marketing thinking, and I say, there's no such thing. Where did it go? Now, what's the Nokia name worth today? And I think that's very central to my own thinking about marketing. It's not a game about building brand equity and momentum and status and power in the marketplace. It's about being right today. And a lot of people a lot of academics want to talk and publish about the concept of brands, and I say a brand isn't a phenomenon, it's an epiphenomenon. A brand doesn't tell you anything about how marketing works any more than the white smoke coming out the top of the Vatican tells you about how the Pope is elected. It's simply something that happens when the event has happened. When you've done everything right, you get a brand. And when you start doing everything wrong, the brand disappears like smoke into the sky. What happened to Nokia? It's a really, really interesting and provocative question. I say it wasn't that it got its marketing wrong, but that it didn't see a competitor doing something from the side. And to make that plausible, just bear with me when I suggest that products or offerings, because it includes services, are made up of components. Not necessarily physical components, but also service components. And that a component is simply a distinct part of the value of the product or service, and it's pretty well defined. So you can say, okay, there's that component of banking, and this is what it does for the total banking experience. And then we can say, newness, the idea of something new, comes from a new component. And if you'll bear with me, this won't go on for too long, but you know when you see a 2x2 that it's going to get boring for a while. But I want to decompose components into two things. What is the component, and is it truly new? Do I have a... Is there a... it doesn't matter. You can see the word new, right? It's N-E. Okay, and then, or is the component simply a better way of doing something that's not new, reinforcing? And then, does the component come into the product to do something that was previously not being solved, or something that was being solved but being done better? So that gives you these things. Take the telephone. When Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, he was producing a new set of components to solve a problem that previously was unsolved. And so that was a truly revolutionary product. The digital phone was really a lot less innovative. It didn't solve a new problem, it just solved it maybe better. And it did use new components, but it wasn't really innovative. When you added things like facial recognition or touch screen or many of the apps, you were, again, not solving a new problem, because you always had to recognize the identity of the person using the phone. But when you turned the phone into an app platform, that was radically new without having a new component in it. That's going to be key to the argument. So kind of that's the way the phone market evolved over a period of 100 years. I'm going to put labels on those quadrants and call one radical innovation. And I think Clay Christensen of Disruptive Technologies talks a lot about that kind of innovation. Then you get this modular innovation, which is just replacing some of the modules. Then you get incremental innovation, and this is what I want to suggest the internet has made very, very important to markets today. So, and leads directly to the failure of companies like Nokia. So what's significant is that when there's an architectural innovation, and I will define it a little better, the things that the company is proud of don't become obsolete, whereas in Christensen's story, they do become obsolete. So, I've still got the same engineers working on the product. I've still got the same scientific knowledge underlying the engineering, and to a large extent, I'm still playing into the same cultural moment. But, and therefore, we sort of don't notice, if we're the incumbent, we don't notice that things have changed, and we keep working on at what we were doing. What the architectural innovation does is it creates an opportunity adjacent to the core business. So it's not that the phone works better or that we deliver more phone value. It's that you can use the phone to do things that Nokia wasn't thinking of doing. That's what I call scope expansion, and it becomes quite voracious in the age of data and code. Because you could always, in principle, expand scope, but it wasn't going to be as easy to make it once in code and disperse it universally with data. And so an example is Garmin. Garmin ran, had a very good product, and all the engineers needed to produce really good maps. And then Apple came along and just sort of like a large truck driving down a freeway, ran over Garmin and squashed it flat. It didn't mean to. It's not like it said, let's build a truck and go kill Garmin. It was incidental. It was roadkill. It was just, well, maybe we're sorry we did that, but we don't feel too bad about it because we were doing something else. We were building a platform, a phone. There are many such examples. IBM's failure to go into the cloud market, leaving it to Amazon. IBM was so much better placed to go into the cloud market, except they said, why should we do that? We're in a business that sells hardware. We don't build hardware, build it all over the world, and then rent out the capacity. That's not our business. And so in that sense, the scope opportunities presented by the cloud were not even of interest to IBM. I want to talk about Amazon in the light of this, because Amazon is, in my view, the most voracious scope expansion the world has ever seen. It's a perfect example of architectural innovation, because really there's nothing new about Amazon except its appetite and its sense of the adjacent opportunities. It's using the same IT as everybody else in the IT space is using. Nothing new. The common architecture across adjacent opportunities is what nobody else thought to do, and it's now kind of too late. Well, maybe not, but I think it is. So I don't think even Amazon realized where it was going until it was halfway there. If you think of the things that Amazon says about itself, the biggest bookstore in the world. Okay, no, it's not just books. Okay, the biggest information-based services and products provider in the world. We also make Kindles and things. Oh, and then, you know, it's not only books. It's kind of everything that retailers sell. So we are the everything store. Oh, but then we do things that don't happen in stores. So we're just the everything. we do everything that customers want. So they drifted into what they are today. And what they are today is this. And I had to change the slide last week because it struck me that these two little entrants in healthcare were not on my analysis of Amazon. And they have opened up two new competitors, the CVS pharmacy chain and United Health's healthcare plans. But the same thing has been going on right around the circle. There's the original Amazon e-commerce. There's their excursion into, well, this probably preceded that. Then there's Marketplace, where they put third parties on their site. That took them from competing with Walmart, Dell, Best Buy, and Barnes & Noble to competing with Shopify and Etsy and eBay. Then there's their AWS discovery, that they can sell what they don't use in the way of technology, or that surplus storage, which put them into competition with Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure. That got them interested in video, because now they can disperse video through their cloud infrastructure, which takes them straight into Netflix's market. They make movies, which make them a competitor with Time Warner and Verizon. And then they have, through Alexa, something that feels very much like a phone, or not exactly a phone, but the things phones do these days. And then if you go up the other side of the chart, they have ad networks, really good ad networks, as I'm sure you know, because these ad networks are closed-loop networks. They have outcomes as well as inputs. And then, to a lot of people's surprise, and certainly mine, they bought a brick-and-mortar retailer. Why have a brick-and-mortar retailer? Why are they suddenly on the radar, on the competitive set of Costco, Safeway, Kroger's, I'm sure Carrefour, I'm sure many people. And what have they done to Walmart, which thought it was a plausible competitor to Amazon? If you do this, if you keep the chart but simply aggregate the competitors and put different colors around them, then every color represents an industry to the people in the colors, not to Amazon. They're all Amazon's industry, but they see what they're doing as a unified attack on a multitude of adjacent countries, as it were, to use a military metaphor. They're going into other people's geography and saying, you know, that we'd like to have that. We'd like a share of that. Now, there are various stories about exactly what Amazon is doing. My story owes a lot to a fellow called Ben Thompson, who lives in Singapore. I think he's an American. Is he American? Mostly American.
American living in Taiwan, so you're close.
and nothing to do with Singapore. No. Okay. Well, he does a podcast called Exponent. It is a podcast, right? Okay. I listen to it, and it takes about an hour to get through it. So I don't listen to every one of his podcasts. Unfortunately, last summer he he took a vacation, so I had a chance to catch up on the rest of my life. But I do like the way he thinks about these problems, and it seems to take him an hour to get his ideas out. What he says is sort of this. He says there are 3 layers to Amazon's architecture. And notice we're back to the idea of architectural disruption. He says it all rests on modules. And Amazon has a small set of ubiquitous modules that it can deploy across many, many different industries. And particularly, I think, the ones that are obvious are its prowess in delivery, its prowess in managing the IT component of transactions, the ability to manage customers, so conventional CRM, but done at a module level as a set of capabilities rather than, they can manage your banking relationships. And then, as we've talked, and as I'm sure you know, a very significant challenge to Facebook and Google when it comes to advertising. There are probably others. I mean, I'm not sure how I haven't thought about it, how they would be deploying those modules across healthcare. I mean, everyone's looking at healthcare. The Google Fitbit acquisition, focuses the mind, if nothing else. But the Amazon acquisitions long preceded that. If there's another module there, it hasn't come on my radar, but it almost certainly is there. Then what they do is they take the modules and they find applications where those modules are crucial. And so everything from AWS to video to to healthcare seem to depend on those underlying modules. And then there's a customer layer, obviously. And the intriguing thing that Thompson argues is that Amazon wants to be its own first customer in every market that it enters. What's a market? Well, this is a market, not that. That's a market. And so every time it produces a market or an industry competitive entry, it goes out and buys somebody in that industry who faces the customer. So that, not so that it can take over the industry, that's the interesting contention, but so that it can work out how to use its capabilities, its modular capabilities, to service that industry. And then it goes to Kroger and to Safeway and so on and says, and we can do this for you too. And at some point, I imagine it gives Whole Foods back to, gives it its freedom and lets it go away, because it's not really interested in dominating the, I think this is Thompson's argument, it's not trying to dominate that market. Now, some would push back and say, look at what they're doing in other forms of retailing. They're stores without cashiers, right? Or, simply the ability of the IT to deliver a better supermarket experience. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think they really want to be the world's retailer through every, through omni-channel. I think it's more of an IT play. But anybody want to push back at this point? I mean, you have to think about it. It's such a phenomenon. And here's one piece of evidence that I find kind of intriguing. And that is that the argument that they're not trying to do everything. They don't necessarily want to destroy Apple. But they approach the world in a very different way to Apple. And it becomes revealed by their attitude toward meetings. So it's been said that Apple, it's been said that Steve Jobs has said that I built this company to leverage me. That he thought he was pretty smart and couldn't, not enough hours in the day. So maybe there's enough hours in the day for 250,000 of my closest friends to help me. And so he hires a whole bunch of people who exemplify his values, and he tells them what to do. And it works like crazy, and he builds the most successful company in the world, the company with the largest market cap of any company in the world up to that point, and I think still is. I think it's this week it's still the most valuable company, even though he's passed on, and the 250,000 people maybe don't have quite the same sense of direction that they had. I don't know. But the essence of Apple is seamlessly integrated offerings. The reason we buy them, I think, is because they work so beautifully as a whole, as an integrated whole. We know they're going to be beaten feature by feature by Samsung, by Huawei, by others. But somehow, if we stick with Apple, Apple will catch up. And it'll do it in such an impressively integrated way that we'll be glad we stayed with the integrated player. Because it's trying to integrate seamlessly across all possible applications of its core technology, it loves meetings. Meetings are where the design takes place. Meetings are where the rough edges are brushed off of the integrated solutions. Jeff Bezos hates meetings. I think that's kind of made its way out of the company in various rumors and shapes. He hates PowerPoint. He hates what people do in meetings. He'll walk down the corridor and see a meeting, and he'll go into it and say, what are you doing here? Why? What are you having a meeting for? You can see why. Because for him, there's no need to meet, because you've designed modules that, like Lego blocks, know what the other modules are doing. You don't have to have a meeting to decide how many bumps we put on a Lego block. It's 6. It's always 6. We solved that a long time ago. So just take it. And if you're having a meeting about the advantages of 7, then you should go. We don't need you. You're not doing useful work. Now, that's, of course, amplified up to a much more sophisticated level. But you can see he's trying to build a set of modules that have as much application as Lego blocks have to life. And particularly, he's trying to build for unrelated businesses. And so, therefore, a meeting is a symptom of something gone awry in the culture of the organization. Okay, which makes him a hard person to beat, except with better products, right? The old-fashioned way. So, I guess when Amazon fails, it's when it tries to go head-to-head on a product, like it didn't manage to launch a phone. I don't think I would trust an Amazon car, but I would trust an Apple car. I think there are a lot of product-level innovations where Amazon is better serving as a distributor or as an integrator of capabilities, not as the brand on the finished product. So I'm going to take a brief digression to talk about dealing with in retail with Amazon, because it's a serious problem for for retailers. And Best Buy probably feels this pain more than anyone else. It's not an insurmountable challenge. I think Amazon has about 50% right now, 45–50% of all digital retail. Is that right? Is that your impression? But digital retail is a very small slice of all retail, such that if you put Amazon on the list of all retail, it's barely 5%. And that depends very much on whether you include grocery and cars. They're very big chunks of retail. But across most non-grocery, non-car retailing, Amazon's picking up about 5% of the market, which leaves 95% for everybody else, of which Walmart, Best Buy, Costco, many people would love to have a share of that. So how do they do it? And can they believe that if they do it now, it'll still work, that whatever solution they come up with will still work once Amazon gets around to driving its truck along their freeway? And the argument goes like this, and this is largely from Hubert, right? I've got to be careful of my H's. Hubert Joly, the CEO, or the recently retired CEO of Best Buy, he came up with this strategy, and it's pretty interesting to hear him talk about it. So the first thing is, we know people are using us as a showroom. We know people come into a Best Buy, they play with our stuff, and then they go outside and look it up on Amazon. So we get first chance to get them. Why do we let them get out of the store? We have to keep them in the store. We have to say to them, no reason to leave the showroom. We will match Amazon's prices. Now, we know that's not profitable, because Amazon doesn't have to carry inventory in the store, and it doesn't have brick and mortar stores to pay rent on. So we've got to have a way around that, and we'll come to that. But in the first instance, we want your transaction. We don't want you to be able to leave the store. And therefore, we will match any Amazon price. And what's more, we'll tell you what the Amazon price is. You don't have to go outside and Google it. We have, our US, our barcodes can be scanned, and they will bring up not only Amazon's price, but also Amazon's reviews. So you can see what other people think and make up your mind which brand you want to buy. So we'll give you the same assortment that Amazon does at the same prices. The second thing is to say there are a lot of competitors in the manufacturing space to Apple who can't afford an Apple store. So we will make a space available within the store for those suppliers. That of course, is not a new idea. It's an idea that, of course, has been around in department stores for some time. It doesn't have a great record of success, but now we're in a space where it may have more viability. So Samsung has done very well competing with Apple through Best Buy stores. The third one is we can fulfill faster than Amazon because we carry inventory closer to the point of purchase than Amazon. So we can largely sort of tell you, come back this afternoon and we'll have the product, or even go get a cup of coffee and we'll have the product later that day. We think we're good at order fulfillment. The Geek Squad is, I think, another part of the secret sauce. So the Geek Squad is a group, it's a company they acquired that has a staff of people who know their way around tech. And it's been an important asset for Best Buy for some time. So you go into a store, you want some advice, you go up to the Geek Squad and you get people who know what they're talking about. They're beginning to think we have to position the Geek Squad against the Genius Bar because we know that's an important benefit of the Apple Store. But more important, we'll come to your house. That's expensive, except that we're coming not as helpers, but as spies. We're going to come into your house with a notebook, and we're going to write down everything you own. And we're not going to let you know we're doing that, but it does mean that we know the brand and vintage of every piece of hardware that you have in the house. So we know your fridge is getting in need of replacement, and we can put you on the list for emails about fridges. So we can do for you what Amazon does, which is say, it looks to our database as if you're in the market for this and that product category. And if that works, I think that really puts a significant competitor to the Amazon data-driven model. And then they're going to go out and buy all the third-party data they can because they operate in a country that doesn't have, what is it called? They're like a Brexit, right? Yeah, right. They don't have a GDPR getting in the way. And I just want to say, there are 3 business models in the world. One is Europe, which is very good for people, but not very good for business. Then there's the United States, which is pretty good for business and not particularly good for people. And then there's China. And China is terrible for people and very good for business. So much so that, as you probably know, they have replaced spying with simply keeping track of your social network. And everyone gets a score for how compliant they are. So GDPR can do what it likes. But it's got to realize that there are 2 competing forces. And to the extent that the interests of consumers are protected, the opportunities for business are reduced. And so, I don't see, I could be very, very wrong about this, but I don't see GDPR surviving 10 years. It seems too high an economic price to pay. Now, of course, that means we all become characters out of a 1984 novel. Or maybe we don't. Maybe we just get used to the idea that, 1984 didn't end well. But I don't know. Here's where you can really, say to Thibault, you brought this guy in and he trashed our values and our. But what do you think? Can GDPR survive in the face of China and the US? All right, let's look at China. So China Incorporated, it has a global approach to the issues I'm talking about. That's my view. It uses architecture in a way that we haven't seen it used before. And I'm going to use it to explore how they approach culture. So they said in 2012, culture's big business. We've noticed Disney. We've noticed how America knows how to amuse the world. We notice the way that it's American music and American movies and American. It's not that it's good stuff. In fact, it's terrible stuff, but it's very popular. And people travel all over the world to visit Disney Worlds and Disneylands. So that's a business we ought to look at. And it was built into the 2012 five-year plan with a twist. Firstly, TikTok. TikTok is, of course, a Chinese company. And all the data that kids reveal to TikTok goes back to China Incorporated. Here is the scale of the thing. Apple Music collects a lot of data and gives it to Apple, and Apple uses it to profile the psychographics of its customers. Spotify does an even better job. And that's, of course, a pure European play, so that's a point against my argument that you can't build these data-intensive businesses under a GDPR environment. I think that's evidence that you can. But this thing, ByteDance, which produces TikTok for the Western world and Douyin for the Chinese world, is much larger and capturing much more culture-sensitive data. And I'm not going to talk about Tencent Music, which is a small part of Tencent, which is a big part of the big data world. But Tencent is every bit of the capabilities that ByteDance has. 800 million users worldwide. A company called Boomplay Music, which I had never heard about until a year ago, is essentially the Spotify of Africa. It's the largest music streaming service in Africa, and it's the product of two Chinese companies. It is the platform supporting a rapper called False in Nigeria. It's a very big force in African culture. Huawei, well, Huawei, you will know, Huawei is terrifying. I just taught a case to the MBA class on Huawei, written from the perspective of how do we help Huawei get even more successful against Apple. And, it's like teaching how can the devil be even more persuasive? What's missing in the devil's repertoire of sins? Is there a sin that he could really, corner? Because already they're doing very, very well, and they are frightening the United States. And one of the issues we sort of played with we didn't talk about the chief financial officer of Huawei, who's sitting in a house arrest in Vancouver, Canada. We didn't even need to get to that because there is so much evidence that the United States government is punishing Huawei in ways that are either prescient or just plain anti-competitive. Right? It's either doing it to make sure that Apple and Google and Facebook don't face stiff competition from China, or it's doing it because it's terrified of the true, of the economic power that lies behind that thing. So it's too fresh in my mind to try and summarize the argument, but certainly I would argue that Huawei is part of China Inc. And notice that in summary, China Inc. is saying, well, we're not very funny. Right? We're not very entertaining. We've got nothing like the skill of Korea in music talent. Nobody's coming to hear Chinese boy bands. So they would conclude. I mean, there's a few exceptions, but nothing like the scale of the pictures that you see there. And then Japan owns the game world, and it owns the cartoon character world, and it owns that sort of that capacity to mimic reality with artificial characters. So we're kind of, we can't beat Hollywood, we can't beat Korea, we can't beat Japan. we can beat them on technology. So we will build the technologies of both production and distribution, and we will become the architecture of the entertainment industry of a decade from now. That, I think, is China Inc.'s approach to exploiting architectural innovation in a way that maybe you could say the US has noticed and is squeaking about, but half the world's IT systems, or communication systems already run on Huawei. So victory is theirs. So that's where I come to an end here. I'll give you 5 conclusions. They're not profound. I think there are more interesting things in the things I'm not talking about, and you're welcome to point them out or to disagree with these 5. But firstly, you know, the game's changing. You're skating on the ice where the game is at its fastest, where the game's at its most fluid. I do think that when DreamWorks hired Holly to promote How to Train Your Dragon, it's instructive that they were both less than a year old. So somebody in DreamWorks agency or someone thinking for DreamWorks said, if we want to be innovative here, if we want to skate to where the puck is, if we want to play the new marketing game, we have to be where people aren't crowding us out. We don't want to be on Snapchat or Instagram. We want to be on the newest thing. And if the new thing goes away, that doesn't matter because we can move on to the next new thing. Second thing I would say is that although a lot of what I've said deals with technology and how we're dealing with a data-intensive world, I think the more that we move towards data, the more we need cultural sensitivity. We can easily pursue cultural moments that we have recognized. We have frameworks. We have ways to talk about, for example, how Hillary Clinton can present herself to the market based on the assets, the brand assets she possesses. What we don't understand is that the moment has passed, that those brand assets have evaporated as surely as Nokia's evaporated, and there's this new thing called Barack Obama. Or after 6 years of Barack Obama, the cultural movement has moved to where the power and energy and passion is from the very people who were defeated in the victory of a liberal president. And so the cultural moment moves toward Donald Trump. And the last thing you do, I mean, if you want to see great marketing, don't look at the Democratic Party of the United States, right? Because in their wisdom, they said, okay, the mood of the country has changed. Let's run the candidate who failed the last time. Maybe the candidates got more exciting in the intervening months. Right now, of course, I'm saying the cultural moment has moved from Trump to you can say this word, Leora. How do you get Buttigieg out of that? I don't know, but we will all know that, I think, in a couple of years' time when he's the president of the United States, because he does feel like the cultural moment, right? He's the force that is sort of architecturally innovative, that doesn't seem to play to the institutional strengths of the party. But there are others, you know, there are other ways to play an architectural game against the brand, other ways to intuit the cultural moment. Third point I would say is Amazon's not going away, and it's probably not going to take over everything. So living in the crevices that it hasn't yet entered is the real opportunity in business today. And strangely, that takes us back to humanity. You fight efficiency with a richer, better, more human-scaled experience. And I think Amazon knows that and doesn't know how to how to deal with it. But I think what will take us into Oxford Street and Regent Street at Christmas time is the desire for something more human than we can get by going onto Amazon and buying the thing that they say people like you like this. You know, that's such a. We just did a case, Leora and I, on a company that does something called read-write platforms. And again, China is the world's largest read-write platform. What happens in read-write platforms is writers, millions of them, write short stories for iPhones and other platforms, and then readers download those stories. So you've got, in the case of China Literature, which is the biggest in the world based in China, you've got, I think, 7 million writers, and you've got way over 100 million readers. So you've got a matching task that's daunting even by Amazon standards, because you're trying to say to people, you like that story, here's another story you might like. And if you think that's simple, it's not. Because first of all, these tend to be young people, and young people have tastes that the world has never seen before. You have one.
Oh, Angry Mermaids.
Yeah, big literary form these days. Right. Yeah, Shakespeare, not so big. Angry Mermaids, very hot. Angry Mermaids emerged from Gothic fashions like werewolves. And what was so werewolves?
A lot of vampire zombie.
Yep. Right. So what's the difference between a vampire and a zombie, and how do they differ from werewolves? China Literature needs to know. And the reason I'm saying this is because if you think that that collaborative filtering is the answer to matching, if you think people who like this, like that, is a simple task in AI or in IT, it's not. And these companies that work in literature have to deal with things like, well, when is a vampire craze, when is a werewolf-vampire blend going to go out of fashion? When is the appearance of a fashion really driven by a bunch of writers who have misread the reason why a particular novel has taken off and think it's because it's got a vampire werewolf cross character, whereas in fact it's just a good romance story. So understanding nuances of taste is so difficult, and I wrote this case partly to try to convince people at the IT marketing interface that the problem was difficult, but the problem is so difficult they can't even see how difficult it is. People just say, well, okay, more data, right? Data contains the solution to evolutions in fashion and trend, but they don't. Something else, which I can't put my finger on, seems to get at that question, and I don't think data or more data will solve that problem. What I think will solve it is human instinct, the same human instinct that produces the very novels that are testing the bounds of human interest in fiction. So that principle applied to stories applies every bit as richly to retail stores and to online experiences and to. It's going to destroy Netflix, because Netflix doesn't seem to get the nuance, and it pumps out these recommendations. Wattpad, which is the company we looked at in Canada, says we're so much better than Netflix because Netflix has to take a movie as a finished product. We take a novel after the first chapter has gone up, and we feed back to the writer, look, these are the things that people are liking in your story, change the story in a way that makes it more popular. So the ultimate adaptive experience. That's not something that I see Netflix being particularly interested in, although YouTube is, because YouTube takes much less well-formed creative products. Fourth thing is brand selection will still matter to marketing. Brand strategy is. Media selection will still be important to marketing. I endorse the TikTok media choice. But for messaging, we have this great asset called people. People will talk about our product. And so you can't leave a void for people like the Macedonian teens to come in and tell voters what to do. You've got to be creating opportunities for the real voters, the real people, the real creators preference. And finally, we've passed the age when polish mattered, and still so much writing in the world of marketing is done by writers. I mean, London Business School wouldn't dare let a real person articulate the brand claim of its business school. The Harvard Business School will fall on its sword before it allows a person who's gone on an executive education program to tweet or say on LinkedIn what they really thought of the program. We create LinkedIn groups and then we censor them. Right? We don't want people talking about what they actually experienced in exec ed. We want this highly polished version of reality, a sort of a Disneyfication of life. That's fatal, because it may work very well for a while, but it doesn't stand up against truth. It doesn't stand up against authenticity. It doesn't stand up against Barack Obama talking against Hillary Clinton, or Donald Trump saying, that's just political correctness, or Pete Buttigieg saying that man Trump is a crook. So truth moves through its articulate expression, or its authentic expression, and that's your job. I mean, that's where you fit into the picture. You are real people. Okay, so that's my story, and I'm sticking to it for the moment, but I'm very happy to debate it.
Thank you, John. It was fascinating to listen to you. We could have continued on and on, but I'm sure we have some questions. Do we have some in the room in London? It's always the first one, which is the toughest. So.
Well, it's not like questions, it's violent disagreement.
Okay, let's go for violent disagreements.
Or even ferocious scope expansion, which is a phrase I've taken to using. In other words, take the conversation off somewhere else. If these are the underlying modules, where what are we missing in the future of marketing? What has the internet done that we haven't yet picked up on?
Just a comment on this. I feel like maybe in the future we can see. I mean, I'm a e-commerce, completely digital marketing for a long time, so I'm a complete. I work on data and everything, but as a consumer myself, I find myself being very tired of these platforms knowing so much about me, like a little bit like it's overwhelming, and I'm seeing myself from purchasing on these platforms because I don't want them to know anything more about me. It's like, okay, and I find myself going into John Lewis to buy something because I don't want to buy it on Amazon. I bought my Fitbit on Amazon, but I was like, oh, darn it, I really don't want to buy it there. So I don't know how. If it's a little bit on the taste of the consumer, when they're realizing how much we know about them and finding ways. I mean, always browsing on incognito mode because you don't want these ads to keep showing. I think the consumers will get there at some point, or how are they going to avoid? I mean, this is a question for everybody, I guess.
Yeah, well, pay cash, right?
Yes.
Use a credit card. I mean, what do you think? I've been teaching courses in big data now for some time, and I teach collaborative filtering and so on. But you're absolutely right. We're all weary of the sense of it's probably captured most in retargeting. Like, why? You should know that I just bought those pants. Don't offer them to me again. If you know so much about me, why don't you know that I don't need your retargeting? But does that mean we pass through a cultural moment when big data is over, or are we just kind of insensitive in the way we use it? Well, I hope that we're insensitive. I hope I like a world where quite a lot of what I want is known to the people who provide it, and they offer me what I want, not what the average person who's similar to me wants. And there's only one way they're going to get that, and that's by knowing me better. And since I'm one of, in my case, You know, the millions of people who fly on American Airlines, I can't ask them to keep notes on what I want. I expect it to come out of AI. But I want it to be what I want, not what the average person in buying on my flight wants. But I mean, this is your job, right? No?
Yeah, definitely, I agree with you. Maybe, what about if knowing what I want would also mean knowing that sometimes I don't want the brand to be too creepy, you know? It's always that that question of what kind of impression you make to the consumer by using their data. No.
I would agree that the first thing we should know about a customer is what is their creep tolerance factor. Right? Can they, you know, are they recoiling? But there again, it's a taste issue, much as I was saying in the world of Gothic fiction. What you like today may not be what you like after you've had nothing else but it for a week. You may feel like a change. So big data is dealing with the toughest of all problems, which is a human desire for novelty balanced against desire for predictability. And you know, we don't. We talk about algorithmic bias. I don't think that even comes close to what the problem is. It's not that the algorithms are biased, it's they're insensitive. They're trying to fit us into pigeonholes which aren't that different to 1950s market segments. Right? All that crude language of psychographics and so on. We're still doing it, but we're just doing it at scale. So.
We had one question from far away, actually, which was, is direct to consumers the only way to survive in the digital space?
Well, no, but I think it's very exciting because as best as I understand it, we pick the companies we want to do business with. As you're probably in the literature on direct-to-consumer is largely a literature about storytelling and about creating a meaningful character for the offering of the company. So you know, Harry's Razor has to compete with I'm blocking the other big razor company. No, not the other direct-to-consumer. Dollar Shave, right. And remember, Dollar Shave's launch advertising was nothing more than really funny. It didn't offer any benefits. It just said, I'm a likable guy. You know, I'm the founder of Dollar Shave Club. And people said, I'd like to do business with you. I don't remember King Gillette from 100 years ago who invented the safety razor, but I do know you. So why, you know, it seems like the market of offerings and rejecting or accepting is so much more sensitive. It's sort of like natural selection working in the area of taste, and many people must fail in order that the Dollar Shave Club guy can prove that outrageous comedy is the way to sell razor blades. You know, it's that kind of put it out there and see if it works. Make sure it's not hokey or phony. Those are dreadful words. It's got to be authentic, but it can also be authentically wrong, right? I mean, I've got to say, Donald Trump is as authentic as, you know, this. He's totally one, you know, what you see is what you get. It's just when you see it, you don't want it, unless you are one of the 60 million people who do want it. I mean, Laura, tell your story about the survey of people who voted for Trump. You were asked, was he, you know, was he outrageous?
Yeah, it's not so much a story. It was just a news report, some type of fairly comprehensive journalistic overview going back to voters who voted for him, saying, how do you feel now? Would you vote for him again? And there was one woman in particular, and she echoed what a lot of people were saying, but it was a nice little nugget where she said, sure he's vulgar. I'm vulgar too. And I like seeing an echo of myself in the person leading the country. That makes me feel more at home. That makes me feel like he's more one of us. So it's sure I'm sure he's vulgar, I'm vulgar too.
Yeah, we thought
That kind of tells you everything.
liberty, equality, fraternity. Now we're discovering it's unleashing. Democracy is just unleashing the awful practices and awful preferences of human beings, right? And you just gotta, you've got a much bigger education task, a much better civilizing task than you ever thought you had, because all those fine words about what culture should be are coming into conflict with someone who said, he's vulgar, but look, I'm vulgar too. You should see me on a Saturday night when I've got a couple of beers inside me. I'm terrible. So it's nice to have a leader who's worse than I am. No, I mean, this is the kind of problem we face. It's sad. That's why I said what the internet has done to marketing. It's unleashed our worst nightmares as well as some of the grounds for optimism. Okay? And on that note, what do? Go home and sob.
Do we have other questions here? No? There was one... yes.
Or a disagreement.
So I totally agree with the point that you made about brands going from polished to spontaneous. And having worked on a lot of like premium brands, I'm facing that challenge of, that premium brand has to be polished. It's about brand equity. It's about that long term, and it can't be spontaneous. So I haven't been able to take that next step into making a spontaneous brand and being agile. I just wondered if you've seen those sort of brands take that step and what they've done to get there.
So, authentic prestige brands. How about the rest of you? Because I'm not sure I have any examples. Yes?
Well, I just think one of the examples, it's a number of years old, but it's very relevant because it sort of kicked off the era of influencer marketing, was the case we did on Ford with the Fiesta.
Mm-hmm.
Prestige, but
Polished message that was very much going for the center of the market.
Mm-hmm.
So you may want to say a few words about that.
Well, I'll just say what a Fiesta is, and then you can elaborate on how they used authentic communication. So Ford was in real trouble. Its best cars were trucks. It was failing in every area of passenger transportation, particularly in the United States. It had a car that was doing well in Europe called the Fiesta, which is a small urban car, and it said, we'd like to sell it in the United States. The trouble is, as the brand manager said, it's everything we're not, right? We are iron, we are trucks, we are country and western music, we are wheat fields and wide open spaces, and we're bringing into this market this petite little European French, I think, was the image it had. This little delightful product that would get, you wouldn't dare drive it on an American road because some truck would run over you, and that would be that. So what? No, you wrote the case.
I was only the co-writer. So this goes back to the ancient days of 2009, I believe, is when they did the launch, and we did the case in 2010. So somebody inside the company had what was, at the time, a pretty radical idea, which was to go out to these people called bloggers and vloggers. This was really before there was a thing called YouTubers. That wasn't really a thing, but it was evident that there were people who were just kind of one-person media companies who were able to get quite a bit of traction. And the idea was for Ford to be able to leverage the spirit of what each of those creators was doing and their connection with their audience, and none of them were particularly huge. So they hired 100 of these people from across the US. They had 100 cars come over from Europe to the US before the cars were anywhere on the road, and these people who were essentially content creators went out and drove them around and created content around them. So it became a case of, instead of this big booming mass media type of campaign, many, many small sparks that would then go and proliferate throughout fairly early social media.
No, that's not prestige. But can you think of analogies? The sort of, I mean, they told us as we were trying to write the case, the lawyers just went ballistic when we showed them the plan. And the plan would come back time after time with nothing but red pen from the lawyers. How can you give 100 cars to people to drive for 6 months? What happens if one of them dies? Well, there was no plan for what happens if one of them dies. Fortunately, no one died, so it was never tested. But there were all these horrible scenarios that lawyers could think of that prevented the product from ever being liberated in that fashion. Actually, this reminds me of a story of someone at Coke who came up with the idea of shrink wrapping your own design onto a Coke can and launched it in, I think it was Hong Kong, somewhere in the East. And it lasted for about a week until the lawyers found out what was happening. And they said, you can't sell a product that's got your own wrapping on it because there's legal requirements about what you have to say on the wrapping. And so they canned it. But look at Coke's plans over the last 2 years. They've been some version of that. So buy a Coke for a friend, and there's the name of the friend on it. Buy a Coke to celebrate a place or a location. Coke's doing exactly what that maverick in the company did.
Every car launch is pretty much doing what Ford did.
Right, and the idea of giving away cars and getting people to talk about the experience has become common. Now, is something like that available to prestige brands? Can you think of examples? I did come close to writing a case about a hotel chain. And do you remember who the chain was? It's a collection of about 6 boutique hotels. And they have installed a social media person whose job it is to monitor social media for any activity by a guest that reveals that the guest is talking about the hotel. And then they will go to that guest and say, thanks for mentioning us in your tweet, and would you like to say more? And make it easy for them. They'll also go to celebrities staying at this hotel who for one reason or another, they don't think very protective of their privacy, and say, will you, can we do something with the fact that you stayed at the hotel? I didn't write the case because I couldn't see evidence that the campaign was working. It seemed to be working, but the trouble is the scale was quite small. When you're doing that kind of handcrafted content, it's difficult to get it up to volume. The Fiesta thing was highly leveraged by regular media. So the press loved the fact that these cars were being given away, and the press would follow the social media content providers. It wasn't so much what the people themselves wrote, it was what the regular media said about what the people wrote. It was all the opportunities for press. So in some ways it was just an old-fashioned PR stunt. And maybe the same thing must apply. I don't know, can you think of anything that goes on like that?
Like a more traditional marketing perspective, when you have content and you don't want to rely on traditional ads, what can you do? But I think, yeah, I mean,
but don't you think influencers are being used in very mechanical ways?
yes.
Many influencers aren't really influencing.
Yeah, the authenticity is going down, I think, because they're just being overused. So it's how they reinvent themselves into... Influencers always existed, it's just called a different name, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a professor at the Harvard Business School who allowed Tyra Banks to sign up for not a popular story, but there's a... by admitting Tyra Banks to an HBS program, we got tons of publicity for the program that also benefited Tyra Banks. So it was a kind of a win-win, right? I don't think we should have done it. I think it was a terrible idea to suggest that people from the media industry populate our courses, but I'm old and fuddy. Could very well be wrong. It could be that we've got thousands of people taking our courses because we are seen as not as stuffy as we used to be. Anyway, it's a...
You wanted disagreements, John. So I have one, a tiny one. Or maybe I misunderstood what you said, but I got the feeling when you spoke before that for you any kind of, or some kind of regulation on privacy could only be at the expense of less impact and less business for companies. And that idea to me is somehow shocking, because I believe it should be possible to prove that a certain level of regulation could actually stimulate innovation, adoption by consumers, and hopefully in the medium to long run, a higher, bigger business, and at the same time, bigger consumer confidence. So I think that maybe I misunderstood what you said, but that's an important point.
Yeah, no, you didn't misunderstand me. I'm just on the wrong side of history. I was at the University of Chicago when a very prominent economist there got the Nobel Prize for essentially arguing that all regulation is counterproductive, that all regulation produces unintended consequences. I'm skeptical of regulation. I think that's one critique of it, is that it seldom anticipates all the things that will flow from creating the regulation. But the other one is that the people creating the regulation are not immune to self-interest. In the United States, a lot of restriction on speech doesn't apply to politicians. So politicians can phone you up at 3 in the morning, and if they are so insensitive, but they are not restricted by the do not call activities. In other words, regulators often construct regulation to serve their own interests. Who regulates the regulators? So there is a set of factors that make me much more confident of the long-term benefits of market solutions. So yes, right now we're in a terrible moment in activities like retargeting. But to regulate them is it's probably appropriate in the short term to regulate some of the grosser examples of mistakes. But I think we should not regulate with too firm a hand, because by and large, we, the marketers, will quickly realize the errors in what we're doing. At the same time, I think consumers will quickly find ways to avoid the worst excesses of market dominance, of markets that intrude on our freedom. So a little bit of patience, a little bit of temporary regulation, a little bit of trial and error. I mean, we in the United States, until the state of California attempted to imitate the actions of Brussels, we had what was called the patchwork approach to regulation. Every state, every city, in many cases subdivisions of cities, had their own regulations. So it's 50 states. That means you got 50 different schemes that marketers have to comply with, and then you've got, within those 50, you've got hundreds of subdivisions. Now this has been a nightmare for brands, but it's had the great advantage that people can look at what works and what doesn't work. And the California law, which is intended to do the opposite, is intended to create a standard that all of the United States will adopt, threatens the end of that patchwork trial and error period of regulation. And we'll see. I kind of like the idea that you can do one thing in Arizona and another thing in Connecticut, and you can do absolutely anything in Nevada. That's.
Thank you so much. Can we have a little word on what you think of cookies for the future? Because I know that's a great topic for you.
Yeah. So we're working on a project for the Interactive Advertising Bureau on cookies. And that we're doing it partly because they're part of the California privacy regulations, and certainly part of the GDPR is the attempt to regulate cookies. And you all know, what the effect has been, is that every time you visit a website, you have to go through a little hoop that you jump through that says, no, I don't mind. You can cookie me if you want to. So, but we think it's going to be a lot more serious than that. Cookies are, at least, you're all familiar with the difference between a first-party cookie and a third-party. So nothing can hurt at this point first-party cookies. Every website is entitled to know who's visiting it and can put a first-party cookie on the site so that when you come back later, it knows it was you that came earlier. That seems to me nobody objects to that. But what the industry realized is that in authorizing first-party cookies, a loophole was created for third-party cookies, which is to say that any advertiser in the first instance is entitled to place a cookie so that they can put frequency caps on their advertising, or they can know that this person has been reached and then later purchased. And then, very quickly, it wasn't the advertisers that were placing the cookies on, it was the ad networks. Because the advertiser might see you once in 3 months, the ad network is going to see you 2 or 3 times a day. So now there were thousands of third-party cookies sitting on browsers and providing a tremendous data resource for advertisers, and permitting all of the practices that are sort of fundamental to the advertising world. So our assignment was to estimate the economic value, the economic minus value, the negative value of getting rid of third-party cookies. And that's fairly easy to do. It turns out it's going to destroy the digital advertising market. It's going to cut about 50% off the digital advertising market. There have been quite a few studies done to show that if you run an ad exchange without cookies, the prices collected by those insertion opportunities are about half, somewhere between 60 and 50% of the price that you were getting when the insertion opportunity was profiled. So it's not that it's worthless. People will certainly bid for anonymous audiences, but they'll bid only half the price. So you take half off the market, and I showed you some numbers there, like a $50 billion display market. It's going to become a $25 billion display market in the short term. Then what happens? Well, what will actually happen, I think this is not what the regulators want, is that missing $25 billion in the United States will all move to Google and Facebook. Like, what else are you going to do? That's first-party data to Google and Facebook. Nobody can regulate their ability to monitor the individual level activity of people who come to websites anywhere on the Google ad network, or anywhere in the system that Facebook runs, or even anywhere on the system that Amazon runs, all of which deliver most of their exposures off the publisher, off those 3 properties themselves. So, what's going to happen? You're an advertiser or you're a publisher. If you're an advertiser, you'll put your money with Google. If you're a publisher, you'll sign up for the ad networks of one of those 3 or all 3. So right now, that $100 billion of US revenue is about 70, is it 75, 70, somewhere in that order percent Google and Facebook. Amazon's coming up. It got to 7 billion out of the remainder, but and it'll probably get even bigger. And we would say that if the banning of third-party cookies goes ahead, the proportion of ad revenue that's placed on Amazon, Facebook, and Google will be 100%. There'll still be publishers. You'll still have the New York Times selling ads, but it will sell them at half the price that it was getting, because they'll be anonymous. No, not because they're anonymous. It's because the only buyer for those insertion opportunities are people who have the data and they're not going to pay for the data they already have. So they'll just bid the price down to nothing. Yeah.
I also wanted to mention, I were discussing,
Thank you. Because I'm working on this project too with John. The passive monitoring solutions and all the things that are cookies by a different name, you may want to say a few words about those.
Well, if it provides identity, it's a cookie. It's kind of the position we're taking. There are a variety of solutions that are called something different, but there's only, they're all violations of privacy. It's just there's no way at the moment to regulate the violations of privacy that occur in the names of the three big monopolists. I'd be interested in your reaction to this, because we haven't published this report yet, and we could well be wrong. So, yeah, we haven't finished it. Yeah. I mean, how efficient is the market in personal data?
Again, I think that what you're saying and what you prove here is that regulations can be bad, or at least privacy regulations happen to be quite connected to anti-competition situation. And so, but now the question is, could there be some efficient regulations? And I'm pretty sure we could find some. Regarding the specific cookie questions, I kind of agree with you that before we find a new system, the open internet could pretty much be threatened by such regulations that you mentioned. So I was not saying that GDPR was an efficient regulation for sure. We're just in search of some kind of beneficial and positive regulation. But I'd be happy to know if someone has a view on this cookie question.
I mean, for me, I don't know if I'm wrong or if anyone says this. The third-party cookie, I understand the concept, I understand how useful it is, but as an advertiser, I have very, very small visibility on how these segments are built. I know who I want to reach, and I tell Numberly, okay, we want these people, but then how they find them, I understand the concept, but I don't know how really effective it is. So, and again, it's a little bit creepy. The customer experience is not great. We are reaching customers, maybe it's reaching the right customer, but in the environment that is not good for a brand, and there's no way for a brand to control that, so it's very difficult to know the effectiveness. So I don't know, I understand the regulation, it could kill this market, but I think something has to be done to make it a little bit more transparent, I guess. I don't know if that's the word.
Maybe I can answer for the people here, because we happen to work a lot in for brands and for luxury, and those people used to have the attitude of saying, oh no, we'll never have a cookie on our website because it's creepy and because it's dangerous. And what happened is that some of the worst abuse or problems with cookies actually turned out to take place for the luxury industry, which had refused them. So my personal opinion on this is that if you want to be really good at something like giving a personalized interaction with the promise of luxury to a very, very high level, then you have to be really good at data. Somehow even better than what the typical e-commerce players can be. And I think that we are, hopefully, we will be seeing this in the coming future, because luxury companies, many of them, I think, have understood this and are now catching up on the data side of things. And again, if you want to avoid Jordan's example, it's perfectly possible to do good retargeting and to differentiate someone who has bought the product and someone who has not bought the product. You just have to have a good data management platform at some point where you connect an interaction with your existing data. And I think that hopefully we are in the worst possible situation now, but companies hopefully are catching up.
That's a nice optimistic note on which to end. To say we're at the bottom of the bad slump, and everything from this point on is going to get better. Against that, I will say, we've identified in the United States these three big monopolists: Facebook, Google, and Amazon. And my best prediction is that there are at least three more that can't wait to get to be as big as Amazon is today. So AT&T has got to be looking at this world and saying, well, we're almost that big. We know that Verizon tried to do it with the acquisitions of Yahoo and so on, and trying to assemble. They then decided it was not something they wanted to pursue, and they've gone in a different direction as a carrier, and they're not in the advertising business, I think it's fair to say, as aggressively as AT&T is. But so we did the study we did from the grassroots up. We took 600 companies that are of over a certain size and says, what's their dependence on advertising? And then how much of that advertising is third-party data dependent? And in that way, we surfaced the big players and the little players, moderately little. And so we found this second tier of wannabe monopolists. And so I imagine that, yes, the future in the near term will be about 6 or 8 companies that can sell profiled information, can do nuanced marketing activities, can do retargeting in a better way than the current vendors of the service do it. Whether there could be a vertical for luxury, I mean, there's something we haven't really looked at, but could you pick off a vertical for automotive? I mean, right now, Cox Media in the States is playing with that sort of strategy. They have a set of media assets that concentrate around a set of market opportunities. You see what I'm saying? They're only interested in automotive and adjacent markets. It's the only company that seems to be doing that. But I put them on the list of potential monopolists, because they want to monopolize a particular consumer-facing activity. So I think that's where the world is heading, and maybe the future lies in having such a player in the luxury space, which when you aggregate it is a very big space. Okay.
John, I think we have to stop. It was fantastic to listen to you, to ask you some questions, to challenge you, to sometimes disagree. But really thank you, and your number is friends, so please come back anytime you want. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your patience. It's quite late.